Just remember those links: tricks, rules, manners, are my suggested feeds. Right, give me the lights on again. Slide can go off. Now, remember the one, how it got to provisions. How do you get from tricks to provision? You don't have to tell me now. If you don't remember, it means you're not interested. The providers may be the climate produced by the rules. The tricks, you've seen the link with provisions, but the providers may be the climate produced by the rules and the current manners. So tricks really are an action situation. That's what I'm trying to say. Now rules are likely to be out of date, repair kits for bad provisions, not bad providers, and a safety net for enfeebled providers. But it can also be shorthand for advantageous time distortion, which is what the word shorthand is, because it means that you can write quicker than anyone has ever written, and that's why it's called shorthand, I think. So in fact, rules are nothing more than an ordering situation. Tricks are an action situation, rules are an ordering situation. Now manners are. They're a recognizable product of this interaction between providers and provisions in aiming to miss, not in just interaction, but in doing something, in aiming to miss. And because I know the suspense must be enormous, and a number who already decided not to come next week, I would just to, as an aside, as a preview, like upstairs, downstairs preview of next week, that the most boisterous systems are the rough ones. The most boisterous systems, the ones which will exist and pay off, any system, are the rough ones. If you aim at something with a rough one, you aim to miss. Now, manners, as I said. The next one is that they are, I think, and I'm not sure about this, but I think that they are tools for humanizing change, not for delaying it, not for distorting it. The rules can distort. I think manners are humanizing of change. So manners really are a resolving situation. All those three, I am suggesting, are very useful tools as long as we define them to our satisfaction, not necessarily to my satisfaction, but to our satisfaction as operators. Then they are useful tools in the whole object of the game, which is what I should talk about next week. Thank you. Can't get out. This one has to start again. Well, good evening. Sorry, a little bit late. No, I'm not sorry at all. Right. Who's doing the lights tonight? It's a hard job. There's someone we might not choose. Let's have those first three slides, which are testing slides, in fact. Oh yes, yes, yes. They're testing, but he's not digging a hole. He's making a pile of earth. Next. Oh, I'm sorry, I can do that. And she's not naughty. She actually designed the clothes. And that is one which no series of lectures, as far as I'm concerned, we can ever miss. It is an alternative to a bridge. It is in fact a double inflated thing, cottage loaf. How are those slides down there, Marjorie? It must be very, you probably can't see them at all. As far as you can, sideways on. I'm not interested in that. That's better. That's far better. I can see them now better. Lovely. It's alternative to a bridge. It blows itself up from the motor in the 8-ton truck which is trying to get across the river. The motor is used as an inflation unit. The first bit inflates, lifts up the truck, then switches off and lifts up the hover pallet, which is the second thing, and then hovers itself across the river. So it's a bridge. Now there should be 6 blanks here. This for a lady, I don't know if she's here this week. She's very insistent. Now tonight, aiming to miss. Aiming to miss sequence. The blue streak has no significance whatsoever. Only just seen it. It wasn't that the ship sequence had anything to do at all with whether the helicopter pilot could land or not. He knew he could land on that ship, so did the photographer, so did the ship. The problem was one of not physical maneuvering, but intent as to why he should land. And that was the milk order. If he would have missed that ship if he hadn't have had 2 pints of milk in the helicopter, even if he'd landed perfectly. For the very last time, where we are now, products, aiming to miss, and eating. Now, the progress of these talks have taken 1 or 2 changes. The words are exactly the same, the areas still exist, but the emphasis has altered a little bit. And also it's now got back to my favorite color. This, as you see, is a side elevation of the chart. Not a plan, and certainly not a front elevation. Now, the food and cooks have got a bit mixed up together. And the providers and provisions, there's a certain, if it's bigger than smaller, then it's more important than it was. The object of the exercise, i.e. to be useful, has got far thicker, the arrow. It rules through. It picks up enormous amount of strength from tricks and a certain amount of strength from rules. And the direction it takes, because it's aiming to miss, and you see there are more targets now. It's even more difficult to miss the targets. The aim is helped by the manners, but the manners, of course, are fed by the fact that it doesn't hit the targets, because if it hits the targets, then the manners of the game go wrong. Cooking is really that feedback. The raw materials have become so slovenly that some of you might actually raise the point. as to where, in fact, in relation to architectural endeavor, where, in fact, you define the raw materials. Remember, in the first talk, I suggested that in any case, architects were not providers, but merely provisions. So the raw materials get a bit important, but rather straggly. But the action starts a little bit earlier than it did previously, if you remember. And the products are numerous, but not all that important as the action. And the action right at the end, when you're going through the targets, and of course the arrow somehow runs off the page, should have done, hasn't, is the eating. But the eating, of course, is again, a continuous process, as opposed to meals, which are a convenience of interval, largely related, I believe, to one's larger and smaller intestine, but nothing at all to do with the need that eating is a continuous process which is awfully important. And I'm suggesting also that architecture is a continuous process which, unless it's important, should be put to bed. Now, so now what I do, we'll have a few slides with little bits about the how very difficult it is. That was very short. How very difficult it is to miss, but how essential it is that you do miss, and the tools that now and again one tries to employ in order to encourage not only architects to learn how to miss, but to encourage society in general to realize that to travel, hopefully, is better than to arrive.
I think you could put on the
yes.
diagram again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, this is on its side on purpose. I wonder if that lady is here. We'll go through these. This really, all this is a chart for a particular client suggesting how, in fact, we considered through talking to them, they divided up their day in relation to various activities which previously they had asked for rooms for. And in fact, what it enables one to do is to see not only oneself, but for anyone else to see how much overlap there is and how much waste there is. So if you can establish calculated waste as a design tool at an early stage, then where's Peter Cook gone? Oh, there he is. If you can establish calculated waste as a design tool at an early stage, then people will be encouraged to say, well, we're not sure whether we ever meant that anyhow. We're not sure whether we ever used that for that anyhow. But this is how we thought you would like it. That is that we are suffering, as I said last week, we are suffering a situation, architects are suffering a situation where because we've been so indolent or boringly methodical, that people feel they have to systemize their wants and urges before we can understand them. And in this, which is another exercise, I think for the same client, that's one. These are just shadow projections at various times of the year. But what it is doing, and I think there's another one there, what it is doing is over and above reminding them of the little buildings they have in this space, is doing rather like the first slide did. It's saying, forget that thing might be digging a hole. In fact, it was digging a hole. It wasn't piling up stuff, but forget that and say, well, it might be piling up. It might not be digging a hole. I.e., that it might not be worrying to be concerned with shadows. It might be constructive to find where you can get useful shadows. That's our duty, to remind people. Because at the moment, for instance, the architecture profession talks about, well, I mean, think of the latest lighting rules. I mean, you can't even use the latest protractor now, if anyone ever did. But I mean, the whole point about lighting is that there was some assumed rule at one time that natural lighting was good for you, and that to have a reduction in light was bad for you. It meant you couldn't read the small print, presumably. However, there may be a lot of times when people would be a lot happier if they could see each other less. That's when shadows become beneficial. So all the time, you add a new tool by not not ad hocery, not using as a pointer a broken radio aerial, which I'm doing tonight, but through engaging everyone all the time in the reasonable exercise of common sense. The Botcher's think belt, that particular transfer area, the nice thing, and why I've put the slide on, is that having designed a rather sort of neat, tight little system of fold-out railway trucks and little capsules on the top and inflatable things, etc., one found that in most instances the railway sidings weren't parallel. They're all over the shop. So the early rectangular plan on the left then had to accommodate rails such as the plan on the right is accommodating. However, all of a sudden you found that you had continuous wedge situations where you didn't have to be too careful about the fold-out condition, because sure enough somewhere you would find a space that was even wider than you'd thought was the standard space. So this was clever after the event, and found that the ground rules were in fact literally the ground rules were a lot more conducive to a variation of usefulness than had they been regular. I'm not sure whether they shouldn't have let the corner of the John Hancock building sink a little bit more, rather than worrying about that particular slide. You see, it might have been the only apartment block that you could have angled floors in. This is now. Have it doesn't. I think I may have mentioned this before, but it doesn't matter because it's relevant tonight. It doesn't matter to me. These two slides, that one, that's a site down the Thames where, in fact, we were suggesting housing could be put. Peter, have I talked about the two sites on housing in these lectures? Because I'll do a shorthand if I have. Rochdale and Muckingford. No? Right. That's Rochdale. That's Muckingford. In Rochdale, there is a slum clearance problem. There is a reduction in industry. There is an aging population. There is high unemployment. There is an overworked, understaffed police force. There is a network of overstrained and near to cracking 19th century drains. And there's a reduced railway service, but faster. That is, the trains are less frequent, but when they run, they are faster. That's in Rochdale. I mean, you can probably see, those experts can see it from the photograph, all those things exist. Now, in Muckingford, there is a water table about 9 inches down. There are soil conditions which are largely sort of 30 years of bedspreads and other rubbish from the GLC with the topsoil on. The police force is called George on a bicycle. There are enormous, highly paid job opportunities in Canvey Island and the rest around there. The average age is difficult to determine because very few people live there. The train service is fast and rather intermittent, much like Rochdale. People living in Rochdale at the moment who want a house say, we know we're going to live here for some years. We might not always want to live here. Indeed, there might be no reason to live here. But we're going to live here for some years anyhow, and we'd like a house. People, the few that are around, in Muckingford, or people in the area who could have a house in Muckingford, say, my word, if there was a house in Muckingford, we would love to live there, but we don't know for how long because we're on our way. We're moving, but that at the moment would be ideal. Both aspirations relate to a short-term occupancy of housing. The 19th century drains and the 9-inch water table suggest that whatever you do with sewage, you can't put it in a pipe system, whether existing or new. The shortage of policemen in both instances might well suggest that they shouldn't be wasting their time trying to save boys from hitting lampposts with air guns, etc. Or sort of trying to reduce so-called vandalism, which a lot of nonsense has been written about in the papers today, I see. The nature of capacity to rebuild in Rochdale is very difficult because the first thing, as you know, the building industry is one of the big high bankruptcy things. So if an economy, if an urban economy is in decline, the first people who vanish are the builders. In Muckingford there's never been a builder. So there's a shortage in both instances of what one would assume would be the immediate provider of housing. Now, without labouring that anymore, what I'm suggesting is that for very different reasons, the aim of the architect should not be to hit the so-called aspirations of the local authority, but to miss all those aspirations and thereby provide a very uniform form of housing which would match both towns. But it isn't what you'd get if you went to Mr. Costland and asked him, can I do houses in Rochdale? He would ask for very different houses in Rochdale as he would from here and would expect a very different procedure. It's unfair to take him personally, I mean the DOE. Now, the avoidance of targets and the value of vague similarities is what the last slides were about. But it was the value of vague similarities and the strength of charting differences in order to come to the same solution. Now, this one is a pun, aiming to miss. These slides are a pun in so much as there are a series of details for a particular structure where, in fact, in literal terms and in very small sort of little jolly details or structuring things, one avoids a problem by aiming to miss. Now, it isn't the same as tolerance, because if you have built-in tolerance, in fact, you are assuming a plus and minus factor in your elements. If you aim to miss, you don't bother with tolerance. Now, the aim to miss zone is pink, obviously. But the top one is a bad one because, in fact, one is back on tolerance because of the connection with the outside skin. It doesn't matter whether you understand what the drawings are or not. The lined skin, that, in fact, has gone back to the tolerance situation. And because of the link, it is a worse detail than this one. where in fact no one is determining where in fact one thing ends and one thing starts again. And it isn't being slovenly. It might actually attract better people into the building industry for a start. The banking, again, the banking of cabins up against the building is an obvious one where it isn't worth trying to fit. It's better to aim to miss. But it's, as I say, it's a pun on what the rest of the thing is about. And once again, if you stack boxes together, but at some time want to take one box away or change the shape of another, then it's never worth involving yourself in the box equivalent of plastic theory as far as structure goes. It's never worth assuming how one box can aid another. Because if you assume that and you say, well, just look, we're not wasting a penny of your money, a minute of our time, because that is spreading to that, what you are wasting is the opportunity of the client and the user to at some date when you won't be around to say, Christ, we never wanted that middle box. And they say, oh, you've got to keep it because that braces that, links that, and so see, and that was very neat and economical for you. So it's really encouraging slovenliness. Now, it can go wrong. This funny little thing was designed for those children in order to exclude their mother, who was tall. And therefore, the pavilion was rather small, and the steps up to the deck over the swimming pool were treacherous unless you behaved like children do, which you know how to balance and use your hands and feet. Now, the father was fat and the mother was tall. So together, they never really ventured into the children's domain because it was either dangerous or impossible. Those children now are both over 6 feet tall. The bloody thing's still there. But the father, who was fat, was short, and he takes refuge there, away from the house. The mother, unfortunately, is dead. Now, you must have seen this building many times before, particularly back to front, which I said to you. But that was the chimney I thought was rather good. That is the chimney the client has now added. 20 feet of stainless steel tube with a hood over the top. Purely because he wanted to alter the method of ventilation and the type of fireplace. But in fact, he's now done far cleverer things than I ever thought of. If you look at the corner of the building, which is not very clear, but the corner of the wood, you'll see white vertical bits, which are enormous angle brackets, stainless steel angle brackets, from which guy ropes go up to the top of the chimney with turnbuckles on, and he can tune his chimney to the winds on the assumption that the roof is stable, which is a little bit loose on his part. But I think it's marvelous. Look at that. And you can see it from miles. I was driving, it's about a mile off the road, and but you can see it from the road if you look carefully. You can see the chimney. I'm driving with a friend, David Alford, actually, and I said, oh, marvellous house around here, I did. And he said, oh, that must be it. And all he saw was the chimney. It was one thing I didn't do, but it's the best bit of the lot. Now, we're back on this same thing. This phased construction, aiming to miss, for a number of reasons, there was a need to phase the construction of this building. Primarily it was economic, but partly it was social in determining what they should be doing anyhow. And so the first bit that went up was nothing more, and is up now, it's nothing more than a steel structure and a slab and drains, etc., etc. Now, it might not be, it might be bigger than they need. that framework. However, it was as much as they were given. So it's impossible now for the local authority or anyone else to say, my word, you're not growing as fast as we thought. You don't mind if we take a corner off your site or turn the road through here, or after all, you don't mind a footpath there because you're not using it. You can't. There's this great rusting framework of the entire site. So it's rather better than a file of letters of empty promises in the desk of some planning officer. However, having got the thing there, you can't continue. You can't have a continuous process of aiming to miss unless you put some validity on the targets that you're missing. You can put an adverse validity, but you must recognize them as targets, and they must be avoided at all costs. If they're worthless targets, you just drive through the middle of them. It wouldn't hurt. So the validity of the target in something like this is often an assumed belief or an assumed aspiration on the part of the client as to what one day they'd love to do. To try and not just be a sort of package dealer, which most architects are. Funnily enough, the real package dealer, I mean the people we call package deal architects, are far less package dealer than the artists amongst us. With a capital A. I mean, you know, the artists. They're the package dealers because you cannot change that package. And they start feeding you dreams about it from the first day, and the fit is so tight, there's no chance of even taking the wrapping off. This sort of load of rusting thing, we put a fair in because nothing to do with the client, but they wanted a fair in the area. Well, there was a nice rusting framework. It was bad time of the year, so the slab might be useful as far as drains go, and they could tie a few guy ropes up to the structure, etc., etc. And although it was an awful day, as you can see, and the slab doesn't drain quite as well as it might, for it's only the rough tamped one, there was a feeling of enclosure, you know, and identity and security. But what was more interesting is that the client said, Christ, yes, you can get quite a big fair in that, can't you? Good Lord, yeah. So it's very good, it's very nice if you can excite people into growing vines downwards through an inspection chamber, or you know, some tomatoes in a manhole. Worth trying. But you have to aim to do that. You can't, it doesn't just play itself. Now, this was a loony thing, because having put up the screens for this football match that was being played several hundred miles away, the people still kept in the stands and the seats. The season was over. There was no rule. They could go and sit on the grass. It wasn't wet or anything. The pitch had to be relaid. But I think there's what is a bit sad here, I think there's something of the tyranny of the system we employed that kept them back. So in fact, it was getting as bad a view of the game as they would have done had they watched it live. Whereas there was an opportunity to get a damn sight better view had they not played the rule game of the enclosure they found themselves in and were happy with. Now, this is the front elevation, of course, of the previous diagram. Here, of course, I think it becomes clear as to what we're about. That lovely black line, of course, is actually helical. You couldn't see it on the side elevation. So it's missing targets in other ways. The targets really should be drawn sideways on, but you've got to allow a certain amount of artist's license. But you see where the thing starts and where it goes off. And the edible zone is the useful zone, is the edible zone for eating as a result of the cooking. Now, in order to avoid those targets with a certain amount of speed, because time is essential in being useful, you do actually get out of the edible zone, the dark grey hatched area. And this is probably the zone that we should concern ourselves with most, because that is the area in which, even if we do what I'm suggesting, we may still be useless. And with that in mind, well, I would like to read you a few quotations. So you must keep this in mind, of course. And there. Now, can we have the lights? I might go back on those slides at some time. That's all right. Now, let's talk about the if we think of the interaction, the shadows, the shadow diagrams. What that was doing was showing a pattern as required or as assumed required by the client, however well determined. If you only show what you think as a result of discussions achieve, and nothing more than that, then it's unlikely you're doing your job properly. And it's no use architects being trained to produce sophisticated variations of enclosures or indeed three-dimensional systems for institutions which themselves are being questioned, very often self-questioned, as to their very validity. And these institutions are not necessarily old institutions. In fact, some of the younger ones need to be questioned, as indeed preschool playgroups should be. The danger of institutions is that there is an element of uncharted self-preservation. They can explain it away, but that is one of the key dangers, because it's uncharted. It is just to exist is strong in an institution. And of course there's an adverse time distortion. That once you involve yourself in an institution, I'm not talking about the RIBA because that's a clown gents club, but I mean real institutions like the voting system or something like that, there is an unhealthy distortion of time in operational usefulness. However, they do have advantages. Such as, let me think, or let me quote. I think institutions have advantages in so much as that they automatically order through similarity, that there is an ordering through similarity. Now, if you take that comparison of sites, I'd spend quite a bit of time trying to find similarities in order to miss the sort of likely target, which was a particular site solution to a particular site, and to try and get a standard one. Now, institutions do order similarities if you look for them. They also display, however constipated way, a range of tested operational choices. And an example of this is something like the Milk Marketing Board, which I'm not sure what it was set up for, but it's a beauty to check on. It's far better than the Egg Marketing Board or the Pig Purchasing thing or whatever. Milk Marketing Board is a winner. Now, forget the farmer. Look it up, because not even I have time to describe it tonight, but go through how the Milk Marketing Board is set up. It's available to all of us. It's public knowledge. And it's very interesting to see how they look after, one, the cows, and two, the milk drinkers. Now, the cows and the milk drinkers basically are the individuals. They didn't choose it. They didn't choose. The farmers might have chosen it, but the drinker of milk and the cow didn't choose the Milk Marketing Board. And somehow that particular institution is at least aware of the danger of losing the constructive disorder of the individual. And I'm not sure whether we're as aware of that, of the strength of disorder. Not chaos, That's a different thing. So the process in relation to encouraging, and I'm suggesting that we do encourage various institutions, which won't have capital I's or headquarters, but that we encourage various institutions which safeguard this advantage of disorder, the individual, and we encourage them in such a way so that they are not set up through people being short of time. They're not set up in a panic state, but they're set up before any particular situation occurs. Because the panic state is the one that sets up the adverse institutions, whether it's government or education or whatever. So to avoid panic, the aiming to miss situation should be made quite public. Shouldn't be a secret. Shouldn't be a secret tool. Should be broadcast. We should let people know just what dreadful risks we're taking on their behalf, even before they've actually employed us. Two possibilities, for instance. I personally think that architects should have a continuous dialogue with the building labor force, hopefully through the unions, but the unions only account for about 40% on a fine Saturday of the building labor force in this country. It might be in some other form, because the unions aren't all that representative, though Lewis would deny it, but they're not. But through the unions, say, there should be a continuous discourse. The RIBA will never do this, anything like that, or the AIA. Just on materials and processes that we're thinking about. You know, Instacrud, Weetabix blocks, and whatever it is, and the weight of it, and the danger, and the smell, etc., as a continuous process, with nothing in mind, nothing in view. So, in fact, that at the same time that we are producing a rather better menu list for those who want to become architects, we're also producing a rather more accurate employment contract for those who are thinking of going into the building industry. You know, I'm damned if I can spend my life building things out of Weetabix, he said, and became a security corps guard. So you've got to... Now, there's another jolly little institution that could be set up, which is one between, say, contractors and architects. I thought I'd be professional tonight, Robert, as you turned up. Contractors and architects. Now, there, in fact, the new animal is systems. Actually, it's not materials and techniques, because, as you know, contractors handle them all. Don't worry. But we could think about systems, you see, of really not needing the contractor except to see that people didn't take too much off the site or whatever. And that could be a continuous dialogue, again, not related to any great housing surge or particular contract, anything like that. So it would take the heat out of it while putting the intensity back, and that is why, in fact, can't architecture, rather than just producing products and assumed sort of beneficial environments, why can't architecture constantly generate good ideas to other people as to what they should spend their life doing or not doing? So it becomes, again, a process and not a product-orientated thing, and we become provisions for life conditioning and not providers of packages for people who are trying to avoid life, or at least circumvent it. And here, in fact, we come on to a thing. Has anyone got a copy of the Times, today's Time? Because I haven't seen it, but I wanted to know. Well, apparently I was asked to sign a round robin in relation to this. I think it's marvelous, this little business of Imperial College. No, RCA, that's right. RCA planning application for the corner of where? What's the street? No one read the news? What? Queensgate. Queensgate, that's right. And, oh, of course, we have a representative here. Well, now, these fine people from the from the RCA, for some reason or other, wanted to pull down a couple of totally sort of worthless, as far as I see, useless buildings on the corner and put up a lovely new building. The DOE, I mean, I don't really mind the sort of the establishment design boutique getting it between the eyes now and again, which they have on this occasion. But the sort of the DOE's directive is rather interesting. The minister overruled his inspector, and the directive letter, the letter of refusal for demolition, not for redevelopment, refusal of demolition for this listed building, listed what, class 2? I don't know, 3, 4, doesn't matter. In dealing with an application for building consent for the demolition of a listed building, the quality of the proposed replacement building is not material. Now that is now law, that is now policy. Now, I find this very interesting. Not all that disturbing, but interesting. Because the role and the power of those who apply for, inspect, determine, and approve listing becomes an entirely new game. And it's close to taxidermy, embalming, or stopping clocks. I see there's a note here saying this could form a basis for a new design course for the Royal College Gents. Well, it could, actually. But think of the marvellous villainy, because it takes less than 10 years if you have Mark Giroard helping you in establishing some sort of worthless cinema or pub or something. Really has enormous significance because of the trode skin covering to the seats, or the tiles that were used, or the fact that there was that extraordinary meeting there, etc. And you can build up quite, in 10 years, you can get a building listed for almost any reason. Now, people must know this after that directive. It would be a very useful gang of people who could go along to Stamford, Lord Burleigh's sort of, you know, the town that the Burleighs stopped, the only major growth town in this country that didn't have a railway station and therefore stopped in its form as a wool town basically dependent on road transport. You could go along to people like that, or others like Lord Lever or Jack Cohen, and sort of say, well, now, how's your system going at the moment? They say, wow, it's great. They say those. The main thing is that we don't want that town opened up, because otherwise they'll never use our hypermarkets. You know, keep Winchester congested. Right, the answer for you here, give us 10 years, we'll make sure no one can knock a brick down. That's what we want. Now this is design, and here is a new design program, albeit possibly unhealthy, but if turned to the way I'm suggesting, i.e. not bothering about the targets here, for God's sake, you really aim to miss on this one. I told you it'd be easier tonight than last week. Yes, remember the danger zones and that end elevation? Financial Times Industrial Architecture Award. Just a few at random, which I've carefully marked. Orcross Distillery, Banff. Consists of 10 huge warehouses, 2 ancillary buildings. Warehouses 300 feet by 100 feet, ancillary buildings 200 feet, 100 feet square. Forms a very large complex of building. They don't leave anything to the imagination, these reports. They tell you that it's quite large. It has been sited in remote rolling countryside with such tact that its scale is a surprise. Though contemporary in essence, Orcross accepts local tradition, both in the use of harling, here white, and of sharper than normal roof pitches. Roofs have been manipulated in various other ways to reduce the apparent height of these large buildings. The result is far from pastiche, yet recognizably kindred to the area. There was nothing there before. Now this is aiming to hit. All of this is aiming to hit. It's the aiming to hit session. And I'll tell you the authors of these reports soon. Considerable earth moving has played an important part, and the handling of the interiors is of high quality. This is an excellent example of a problem in architecture which we have to solve, the large-scale intruder in need of sensitive handling. So they got a gong. Now, oh, this is a beauty. New Covent Garden Market. Any of you been there? Have any of you been there? The one pub. Have any of you been to New Covent Garden at night when it works? This distribution centre is planned with classical simplicity and directness. That was the one thing that you never found in the old Covent Garden. Otherwise, they'd never have made those profits. Anyhow, classical simplicity and directness. The massive scale of traffic and structure of controls, tunnels and roads being logically reduced as the goods are broken down in bulk to the scale of the shop and of handling by humans. No runs of pipes, boxes or switch panels mar the design. When they are important elements, as in the air-conditioned flower market. Now, why is it important to have air conditioning in a flower market? Primarily because you've got a roof that lets the sun through. There's a flower market. They are used to enhance the interior. The main market is a bold and self-confident solution to the problem. Oh, thank God we're still solving problems. And the detailing is sturdy and sensible throughout, and the external expression of the building is clean and without fuss. The impression was of a quality building realized with a strict budget only by using maximum design skills. Well, that's nice. You know, I mean, at least they say, well, it doesn't look so, it looks like you use minimum design skills on this one. Using maximum design skills and by complete control of the construction, finishes and services. Well, that's a great relief from all clients to think that architects at last have some control over the construction. And here comes the sensitive 4B pencil man. The leftover peripheral areas have been planted and grassed, but do not seem to have awakened any enthusiasm for their maintenance. Now, a Covent Garden with flower gardens. Right, we won't go on very more. Oh yes, this is a nice one. Computer building, Newcastle upon Tyne. Designed deliberately to be deadpan. This building almost literally disappears. It's a single-story accompaniment to the adjoining headquarters office, which I might add is 4 stories high and certainly doesn't disappear, so presumably you see it through this building when it's disappeared. You see its accompaniment. The design accompanying the adjoining headquarters office is linked by a slightly lower building, dark blue brick. On all sides, the exterior consists of full-height glass reflecting panels. Windows which can be inserted within the inner wall structure are not visible from 5 meters away. Hold it! You can see that window from 30 feet. Watch it next time. Architecture of the building. I'm not against these buildings. It's this claptrap. Architecture of the building is negative, but technically it is brilliantly simple. It does not stir the pulse, but it does innovate. And then there's milking parlors, and there's another one which said it looks like it could have been carved out of granite, but in fact it was brick and steel. Oh yes, this building is superbly thought out and built. It is detailed in a classical way. Every dimension and proportion is elegantly controlled and detailed as though it were in marble. Yes, full marks to him. Yes, I should get a Steel Award. It is a simple building, a plain rectangular shed. It was seen when more or less empty, and one wondered as the huge machines moved in whether the white walls and scarlet steelwork may not begin to look a little too elegant by contrast with the heavy work they house. Now, there we are. Now, what you must know, the buildings, as I say, may be admirable. The writers of that were Professor Peter Shepherd, Professor Jack Napper, and Sir Colin Anderson. Now, if in fact that is what, and this is sent out free by the Financial Times to not to architects but to other people to be told what in fact we are all looking for and where we give our medals, because we have determined there what is important, and that is a great steps forward, those buildings. The whole point about that, as you realize, was that I do think there's a terrible danger in defining hits. The situation at the moment that interests our office is related to things which could never be a success and certainly could scarcely be a hit. For instance, we're interested in drifting harbours, which don't get much sort of support from the Docks Board at the moment. A floating breakwater, which is a little bit doubtful. A nomad truck park, high security truck park, which tends to deny one, almost a contradiction in terms. It's like a gypsy high security truck park. And a walking airport, which is obviously absurd when you can fly. However, we labour on, as you are doing, listening to this. And I would like to finish up on this, because of course tonight is the great night of discussion, with two more timeless quotations of what I think our tasks are. And one is to establish how little built product architecture is required, and to continuously establish this and continuously test ourselves, and how much performance-directed architectural thought should be included in continuous social and economic planning. Our second task is very much one of the moment, and I hope I won't have to say this in 5 years' time, is to reduce the continental and sovereign and regional and climatic and economic restraints that encourage retention of architecturally, socially exclusive provincialism, which we are really wallowing in at the moment. So, aiming to miss requires a robust system. And robust systems survive and improve through showing the real value of intermediate targets by missing them. It's interesting, I don't know, having gone through these, and a number of you being patient enough to have sat through all three, I'm still not certain whether lectures are the ideal way of having this sort of exchange. I'm really, I think this is one of the nicest places to talk in, so it's a delight actually to talk here, so that helps. But I wonder whether in fact there is any system whereby there can be sort of a sort of continuous exchange without it being too heavily programmed, that doesn't have the event connotation that sitting around like this does. I suppose that's what, if in fact schools of architecture were open to all at all times and weren't just a sort of extrusion process for the loony volunteers, who think they might get something out of it at the start of their life. But that possibly could work. I like the sound of these plastic glasses. Is that all they are? It's going to be a sort of Jimmy Durante at the piano act with them, or are they going to be filled? Well, I think I actually like. I don't think anyone's allowed to drink unless they speak. How very boring. Very boring. Lovely, thanks. There's apparently an interesting dilemma, though I don't think any dilemmas at the RIBA are really interesting, but they find it interesting there, as to whether they should encourage more or less architects. And they have the sort of immediate sort of groan, Christ, there's no work, so we should encourage less. Then they have the, you know, the big thinkers of 66 Portland Place saying, no, extend our tasks, you see, make us essential elements of almost everything else. And then they have the economists there, or the bookkeepers, who say, well, Christ's sake, we're broke, and it would be far easier to run a smaller institute. And then they have the regionalists, who say what we need is a bigger institute, but more fragmented. And we don't really need London. What we need is a protection racket all through the country. Otherwise, you can't blame us if we do a Poulsen on you. And then they have the academics, who, to a large extent, the academics at the RIBA, and in a way, Jack Napper's an idea. I mean, it's not libelous. It's probably here tonight. They closed quite early, I believe. And they, in fact, have, I think, are quite dedicated men. They are dedicated to the eternal process of producing architects via schools of architecture. And this, they think, is, well, dedicated to it. They're absolutely opposed, as you can see. I don't know if anyone here has ever tried to do the RIBA exams externally, but they don't make it easy for you at all. Now, of course, this maintenance of schools of architecture also has a great deal to do with that period just prior to retirement. It's awfully useful to move on to a school of architecture. That's probably putting it at its lowest, sort of saddest form. But I do think that if I was a member of the public and not a sort of rarefied elitist, I would be very worried by architects at the present moment wanting more protection. I would be very suspect of architects not wanting to be brought up before the Monopolies Commission, which they are, God willing, going to be. I would think that these lot of people are failed rainmakers, and that they're doing a touch of the sort of, you know, elephant going to the valley where they die. The elephant's trumpeted. They only recognize warring elephants when they've lost one tusk and their trunk has got elastoplast on. And that's when you start being friendly, because you're going into that last valley of the dead elephants. If this is so, I don't think it takes very long for the sort of one of the brightest sections of the population, i.e. those under the age of 16, to suss out that it's really is a bit of a dead loss as a job. I think this is happening at the moment. What's wrong with it? It's just a thought.
It's remarkable that 75% of all building work in the UK is commanded by architects, and only 14% of building work in the United States.
Yes, yeah.
It seems to be a very odd statistic.
But it's by law here, you see.
Yes, but I wonder whether an American member of the public would have the same view that architects in this country like to presume the British public have of the appropriate person for providing you with a piece of enclosed environment, being an architect. I wonder that in the context of the fact that assuming people in the world to need some kind of a roof to begin given to them in order that the rain may be kept off. One can look at the UNESCO predicted population figures for the year 2000 and ignoring any wars which might occur. In the meanwhile, observe that it will need 1 million houses to be built each day between now and the end of the century. Whether it's really significant that architects should be involved in the production of environments at all, because clearly, even if the RIBA multiplied exponentially, it couldn't deal with that.
I doubt whether architects should be involved with housing, although in any way. I doubt whether they should on their track record. I absolutely agree. Yeah. But I also think that there is a danger. It isn't just learning to tell people that it's lovely to have a wet head and you don't need a roof. Although rich people do that, don't they? I mean, they walk over the moors and things, and they things that they go awfully wet, but they're healthy. But I think that I don't think a house is any less of a home than a comfortable hotel or a friendly airship. And that you notice the lack of a house only when you haven't got it when the need is there.
Yeah, but you're defining enclosure as being necessary the whole while, and therefore admitting to the need of some mechanism to provide the enclosure.
Yeah, yeah.
The question must be whether any organised body of people determines it as their particular responsibility to provide enclosure as against providing eggs or milk,
yes.
to quote to other institutions.
Well, I think that's a very good example, because what is interesting in relation to food is that Shell and BP are in it up to their neck as much as the farmers are now. And I think that the assumption that shelter is related to environments that we call buildings, rather like the thing which, that bridge, when it was inflated the first time, it was a building because it had a truck in it. When inflation went on and it hovered across the water, it was a vehicle because it was moving. It was exactly the same structure. And I think that you see, if you take this country, which doesn't, is so, it cannot actually even feel the million houses a day problem. It hasn't got those vibes anymore. It hasn't got even people belly aching at it because it isn't important. So it doesn't even have, warring dervishes who want pemmican or whatever. I think that the range of the whole situation about shelter, that architects, if they're any good, are probably in a good situation, but not for very much longer, to spell out methods of devolution of their power and responsibility. And it's not to do it in quite such a sort of quaint Mickey Mouse way as self-help groups or anything like that. It's not that at all, because they're still making houses. It's a spread over the situation of shelter and the frequency and the intervals at which it is needed, and literally the comparison between a house and, as I said before, an edible umbrella that becomes edible when the sun comes out. I mean, your figures are right, and so are these. Because it is immediately a problem in so much it's an economic problem, because we don't understand the economics. In 1974, 600 million people earn £24 a year or less. And in fact, every year there are more and more people becoming hungry and poorer on the ratings. So the whole situation about shelter, I mean, funny enough, at one time, if you take some of the, you don't have to go all that far back in history. I mean, take something in this country, which was very, we know all the reasons for it, etc., etc. But the tied cottage system, which was related to by far the largest industry, at the time tied cottages really worked. There were 4 times as many people working in agriculture as any other industry, and I think the second industry, in fact, was shipping and trading or something. It certainly wasn't mining or anything like that. that the Tide Cottage then actually took shelter out of the economic argument. It was the jacket on your back. It was the agreement for employment. The house. The house was like the shears or the scythe you were given, etc., etc. It was a service. It was a process. It wasn't a bribe, and it wasn't a costed item, because people didn't work on the farm unless they had shelter. Full stop. Now, perhaps, I mean, just as possibly one makes food more and more indigestible to people with bad teeth, you encourage people to go to the dentist or at least have decent false teeth. But, you might do that in the shelter equation. So it becomes inevitable that the service is there and is therefore not costed.
But then possibly not paid for in the context that people need to earn a living off it by designing it.
Yes, probably, yes, exactly. But there aren't many people inventing fresh water anymore. But there were a lot of people who used to make a lot of money out of divining. What's it called? What's it? What? Dowsing. What's it called? Dowsers, yeah. No one's come up, there's no money to be made saying, here, I've got an even better water for you in Manchester than that North Wales rubbish. I think so, and I think this, yeah, absolutely. So,
there's a funny contradiction, I think, which is that if you put the Tide Cottage model, you have a model which you, I think quite rightly said, is outside economy, thought of in terms of present units of measurement and profit and all that stuff. If you put the other model, which is the edible umbrella, up to the sun comes up, there is in the other model this perpetual kind of consumer paradigm. And I think that there is this strange contradiction in the argument, actually, in your argument, really, and also in the climate in general, about which is the right way out. The one of moving out of the whole area into a kind of, the Martin Pollock thing, garbage housing, into a kind of total transient solution. Or whether it's better to go to Earth. I mean, I really think this is if one's really talking about the kind of populations without a war in some point in the future, one's talking about scarcer and scarcer resources, then this question of what is the right strategy in terms of what we do with objects to make shelter and in which context we do it is a really serious question.
Yes,
I think the model seems to need to be exposed.
Well, I think it is, I mean, you use the word objects. I think if shelter is seen as the increasing provision of particular objects, rather than the increasing availability of a particular service that stops you getting wet because it hurts you or whatever, then you're right. There is a confusion. But no critics of persons like myself, who I'm still convinced that I still have a great deal of interest and affection in waste and scrapping and consumer destroyable products. But the key ones have never been objected to, which are in fact food. There's a certain interest in recycling, but and yet the food industry is an extremely it doesn't get strictures from the government. Not many. It's extremely boisterous industry, a robust system, and is dedicated to waste and to continuity of provision.
But these large figures, or $24 a year, that points to an entirely other situation where there is no food industry on that scale, where people can't hardly survive. You see,
no, but it doesn't list dead people.
These two, you give very large figures which refer to the third world, or very low figures in terms of annual income. That, you don't also realize that those people are, they don't have the food situation that we have. And you have to put those two things together. where you don't have this consumption of food either.
Perhaps they related to they're outside the economic system in relation to their food.
Probably.
Well, they don't necessarily buy food.
Buy food, they practically die from starvation.
Yeah, but the food that they get for subsistence.
But I mean, it's not my information on certain parts of the world that they have subsistence at all. They just barely make it. I mean, I think that's an area of confusion.
Well, I don't see why it's the area of confusion. I think it might be an area of guilt on our part, that we're not concerning ourselves with the real problem.
Not necessarily guilt, but also can become our reality at some point.
Yes, but yes, I agree it might. But but I think that all one does I mean, I nod and agree, but it's very gloomy.
Not necessarily, because you can choose to play it differently. I mean, I think...
Yes, but we can't choose to play it differently if we're concerned about...
I think the umbrella is the Proust novel in relation to shelter.
The edible umbrella.
Yes. On the other hand, I think one could use other technique, but then with other technique comes social changes because they have to be socially acceptable. We either have to do the propaganda, or we have to change the system, or something. I mean, try putting people under, I don't know what.
No. Well, I see what I see. No. I see what you mean. But what I was trying to say tonight was that if in fact we start playing in a ball game that we didn't make the rules for, and we don't really know how you lose, but for instance, I don't think that one should try and make things more socially acceptable or change the system in quite such it's quite such a bland way as I think you were suggesting. I think, in fact, coming back to the earlier point, that if you redefine the provision of shelter in such terms that get all right akin to the edible umbrella, then there is no particular system to change or no battle to fight, because there is no structure that can sieve that through and oppose it. This is one of the targets you miss. If you really think that it isn't political suicide for either party to solve what they jokingly call the housing problem in this country, then I disagree with you. I think it is political suicide, and that is why it comes up year after year, and they all have targets, and they never hit them, and anyhow there's no evidence at all that the target has got anything to do with shelter. So I think that possibly one doesn't change a system which is...
That's making the thing statistically all the time, which is like very abstract. I mean, it's formulated in a very abstract way. So many houses, and we make it, we don't make it, but it's extremely abstract. What does that guarantee, really? I mean, they formulate it in a very abstract way.
Well,
easier propaganda for them to formulate.
I mean, sometimes they formulate it in a very detailed way. For instance, the Egg Marketing Board this year is no longer, for the first time in 15 years, this Christmas, is no longer, because people don't eat eggs in the cold weather, apparently. Not so many. Or eggs aren't consumed, so many there. So there was always a guaranteed price for eggs in the cold winter, and they were powdered and put into the great powdered egg mountain in the sky or wherever. And this year they've said, no, rot it, you organise your chickens better. We're not guaranteeing you a market. Now that was establishment. That was statistically determined. It wasn't theoretical. It's actually happening. Now it might be that rather like the apple forests, what they call apple forests, orchards. The apple forests in Kent. These orchards in Kent. They have always been very light on their toes, the apple growers of Kent, and they literally wait for particular demands or lack of demands at the beginning of each season, and they take them all out in the first few months of the year. If they don't get anything from the government about guaranteed prices for apples or demands for showerings, for scrumpy or whatever, It's out. They've cleared out. And the Kent, the whole Kent farming situation is that the most profitable orchard is not on absolutely the best soil for apple trees. It's on the median soil that grows pretty good apple trees, but is marvelous for other things. The well-heated insulated bus shelter on the bus route where the buses never turn up might be very good in relation to the housing problem.
For some people,
No, but you know what I mean. That it's spreading the system without a sort of time-wasting punch-up against an institution which really is only too pleased to divest itself of its responsibilities. I mean, I'm sure the DOE doesn't want anything to do with housing. Sure, wish it would go away.
So if you're aiming to this, how do you know that you haven't just moved the target? For example, there's I went to Irvine, California, to a university, and there was this enormous university that I'd been told was virtually given freely by the owners of the land. It was some big ranch family that owned an enormous area of California. And they gave away this university. They encouraged, that was to encourage people to come and live around the university. And land was very, very cheap. And it was only discovered fairly late in the operation that what was really happening, there was that the Irvine family, or trustees, were really selling water. And so it looked as though they're aiming to miss, but really they're right on target.
They're right on target. Yeah. An admirable group. I mean, they deserve a Financial Times award. I think the only way is this business of observation in time. That's why I did the side and the front elevation. That as you're approaching targets, you're also going round them, and that as you pass them, you can still observe, so to speak. I think it's very tricky. I think that's one of the skills. I think it's one of the skills because I'm not actually opposed to the Irvine family selling water. I think that possibly where we at architecture or whoever was involved be more shrewd about aiming to miss. They might have hinted to the Irvine family a rather less sort of time-wasting method of building a university in order to get the community. Because the whole thing about water, I mean, the nice thing about water at the moment is that well, in this country, presumably in the States, it's still reasonably cheap. And that all you really pay for is moving it. So in fact, it's more static a product than powdered eggs. Therefore, there is a locational problem in the value of water. They've reached it at the moment on present acceptable things about having more than the 4-inch bath, etc. In the route from North Wales to Manchester. They're not doing that second valley, because that bit of money would be just too high for Manchester's water rates. So I'm thinking round that very sly question as fast as I can.
in fact, that was a demonstration of being on target, because Irvine were on target. It's only illusion that they were off target. They're in fact on target. But the problem, I mean, their target was very simple compared to some of the targets in Smith. They just wanted to make money on selling water.
Oh yes, I mean that target. That is a target which one should avoid. But the point that Richard was making, that in apparently encouraging the growth, one was encouraging other people to hit a target straight on. And
but both
this is
the targets that they thought they were aiming for. I mean,
no, they didn't. Only the Irving family won on that one.
The others also.
No, they didn't.
No, they finally had to pay for water. They got something.
Well, they got a university. I mean, that's like a hole in the head. I mean,
it's not the same thing as the target that you're moving. It's not the same thing.
No, I don't. I was only saying that there is an opportunity that if you move craftily enough, you can observe the target from both sides. I didn't say the targets move. They don't. The targets. All the targets do is suffer from decrepitude. What does it say? Piss off. Oh, pass up. Well, I'm going to read this. Dear Mr. Blank, Ray, Environment Department, I'm surprised that St. Martin's School can seriously contemplate having... Oh, this is the Department of Chemistry at the University of Leicester. I'm surprised that St. Martin's School can seriously contemplate having an environmental department within the school. Environmental problems are almost always complex and often multidisciplinary problems. And I doubt that any course given by an art school alone could possibly be adequate preparation for any useful job. A course which included elements of pure and applied science and economics as well as art training would surely be more valid and more valuable. Please tell me what possible jobs you think students might take if they simply have art training. And as the person who's passed it up has said, this is a true example of aiming to hit. Wonderful timing. I think that back to the Irving family, they were the only people who won on that.
No, they finally have the target stays where it is.
Yeah, the target stays where it is. And therefore I was saying that I think the point is that I think in what we're involved with, most targets are quite easy to define and quite easy to suss out. That was a very clever one. But it never happened again. I mean, not in that area. Well, I mean, it happens with cattle.
The Walt Disney family set up the School of Visual Arts in California. They built an enormous complex, art complex. I visited that at the same time as I went to Irving, or Irvine, as they say. And it was a very ambiguous kind of building, rather extraordinary. You weren't sure whether you were visiting NASA or an art school. And they pumped an enormous amount of money into this enterprise, and it seemed very suspicious. They built a theatre. The dean, or the man that ran the thing, was a stage designer, a producer. They built a theatre to his specification, where every square meter, or I suppose they use feet and inches over there, was raised on jacks. You could move the whole auditorium up and down in small segments at will with push-button controls. Before anything was ever produced in the theatre, they fired him. So nobody could ever use that thing because it was built to a very precise specification for one person's idea about theatre. They weren't a bit worried. I'm sure that, and that the school has fallen into disuse practically.
But that isn't an easy one. That isn't a difficult one to suss out.
Yeah, then you realise that they knew that the school wasn't technically feasible, and that it could be taken over by NASA, and that NASA would find a use for all these up and down elevations. And you became aware that the target was not to make the biggest and greatest art school in the world, but for them to produce a piece of real estate.
Real estate for NASA.
And in an area which another Irvine situation, Walt Disney owned all the land around. And people had to buy the plots of land around because they would be
well, this is exactly the same. I mean, the unwritten story of the National Trade Center at Birmingham has got nothing to do with trade shows at all. It's a group of primarily of hoteliers, and also the council wanting a bit more return. This is in short term. Hoteliers and the council wanting more return on their airport than they get, since Manchester and Speke, as Liverpool one, has grown. But the long-term aim is an enormous transit warehouse for breaking down large loads between North America and Europe, and not as a national exhibition centre at all. But I mean, those things, I mean, those are usually reasonably clear. Well, I'm not
I
reasonably
think there's
clear.
something a little ambiguous about the position of aiming to miss, because you know that you're not aiming at the target. Therefore, your aim is somewhere other than the target.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, so that the target is the new thing that you're aiming at. You're missing the target.
Yes, I mean, if you try and fire in a fairground between ducks moving along like that, then you're far less interested in the size of the ducks as you are in the speed of them. But you're still watching the target, though you're aiming to miss. So you concern yourself with the speed of your Irvins or your National Trade Center or whatever, or Disneyland thing, in order to, in fact, give some sort of generation to what you do. But your skill at aiming and your capacity to pull the trigger at the right time is unimpaired. In fact, should be improved.
Cedric,
Because if you look at the size of ducks, you decide where they tip over. So if in fact your time sequence is blown because you know there'll be another duck along, and you know just get it below the neck.
You know, there's a funny figure ground problem in the argument, because it presupposes that the ground, or the rhetoric of the argument presupposes that the ground may necessarily be the releasing converse of the target. I mean, I just thought of an argument by Max Planck's, which was, there are no unanswerable questions, there are only badly formulated questions. So it sort of posits this relationship between the question and the answer. But there's something more automatic about your rhetoric, you know, which involves, like the one with the ducks, for example, and when we're going where a duck isn't. But how does one know necessarily that I mean, it's an interesting creative technique, because it necessarily is it a well-formulated question? Is it necessarily a well-formulated question?
Well, I would suggest it was, actually, but I was suggesting, as I spent 3 weeks suggesting it was, but that...
What happens? You can say that the aim is to make money, or the target is to make money.
Thank you and good afternoon. Yes, you could. I mean, you could.
what do you do about the St. Louis Gas and Electric Company, who in 1967 started handing out free lamps and light bulbs to their consumers, and who later got hit by antitrust laws? It seems that they're sort of catching both ways and being caught both ways.
Well, the Detroit Edison, when I was asked in Detroit in '68, we still got free light bulbs for any fitting, as long as you brought in an old, useless Detroit Edison bulb. And what they did actually is that they were they weren't overprinted, they were in different wrappers, and they had on the wrapper the phrase, no commercial value. Indeed, they hadn't had any commercial value, because you couldn't buy a light bulb in a wrapper that said no commercial value on for any money. Though you could buy identical light bulbs in other wrappers which said 20 cents or whatever for it. And they, as far as I know, they still do that. Now, I personally think that was an admirable service. I mean, it would be dangerous if Philips and people started selling, aerials that always fall off radios, such as that thing. But I think that just as no one costs false teeth, and no one asks in the National Health Service a widow to wear her husband's teeth, though pounds sterling for, pound weight, teeth are far more expensive, false teeth, far more expensive than a house. But that particular equation doesn't come in, and the replacement is seen as an inevitable process. I would have thought that it would pay the National Coal Board to supply domestic users with coal free. They can't come under the Monopolist Commission in this country because they've got a monopoly. You know, I mean, the Monopolist Commission is written about those late slags, you know, who didn't move in early enough on. So, I think that if those other people were caught by the Monopolist Commission, you know, or the trust laws, just as Kodak quite rightly were in the States, that you can't, in the States you can no longer buy a film with the processing price included, but next to the film are envelopes worth a cent, which you pay an awful lot for, which is the envelope that you send the film back in and they process it. I think that to encourage a particular sequence without any sort of chance of competition is not admirable, but in many instances may be extremely viable. Yeah.
Cedric, what's your game with us? I mean, the thing that's been fascinating me, this series, having heard you 43 times in a number of strange places, is the structuralism of it. That you've been very insistent, for instance, in your use of that diagram. Its repetition, the insistence upon our understanding of the loops, the feedback loops.
Yeah.
And then one starts to think of us as these ducks moving, but of no necessary substance. Also, very consistent audience, pretty much 80% of the people have come before, and you probably guessed that, or maybe it was a successful series. And I'm fascinated by what, you know, as Alvin would say if he were here, sort of, what's your game? You know, because it's the most structured lecture, even any one of them is more structured than you usually do, less dependent on anecdote, more dependent on the structure of the thing, the repetition of the diagram, even the false diagram, that, you know, the use of something, of a device, whether it's a diagram or a sequence, and the gaps and all the rest of it, and then throwing one off course. And my interpretation, probably quite wrong, but one thing that worries me is that I think it's an audience that may still, nevertheless, expect, in the sort of puritanical sense, to have a message, even if, and perhaps, and am I wrong, would misunderstand your message as always miss. Because that could be just as disastrous as aiming to hit, in my view, because it would immediately, you know, get into a certain kind of coyness, a certain kind of over-cleverness, whereas my suspicion is, what I like about the things that you do, is that you're prepared to play it straight sometimes. I mean, a lot of that, you know, like the nice example that you gave, I think, last chat, one of the doorway to the Blackpool Zoo restaurant, was that it was playing it so straight it almost hurt, you know, and it was playing it straight, overlaid on straight, overlaid on straight. And then in the next breath you can say, but here we needn't. And to me, that's the essence of the whole thing, and I'm desperately concerned, but I might be wrong, that we're waiting for the message which says, don't aim to hit, aim to miss. Okay, we've got the new message, now we can all... and that would be missing it also. Also, I like your idea of the speed of the duck, but not necessarily its size. Can you... But the other thing, again, another interpretation, the well-laid table. I mean, what you've given us the last 3 weeks is absolutely the well-laid table with the peas in the right corner of the TV dinner, which is certainly aiming to do something, you know, and a reminder of where the peas were.
Yeah. That's
what's
right.
Been your
No, it's a superb account of what has been going on. there's a little bit of self-indulgence in that I wanted a discussion such as this, in so much as I don't put myself. I mean, it's very easy to do blackboard doors and things. I don't normally put myself in a situation where I get 3 sly questions in a row from Richard Hamilton, the last one being the toughest of the lot. So there's a certain amount of self-indulgence in that. I also think that if anyone thinks, as you said, rather better than I could put it, that it's either or, then they've got the message wrong again. And the point of this series of lectures has been to, as have some past ones, have been to, in my view, to overstate the obvious, which I think is neglected. Therefore, I am intellectually slovenly and sort of emotionally thoughtless about those lovely targets, one of which now and again might be worth hitting, because I think that the emphasis is on hitting them. So primarily it's been a suggestion of shift. But you can only make a suggestion of shift in rooms full of sharks like this if you spell it out reasonably clearly and sequentially, and you do get the peas in the right corner of the tray. Now, the usefulness of what I've said. I mean, personally, I've actually described how I go about design and test myself, even if I'm still hitting targets by mistake. There was a big bit, anyone, well, at least one person here knows, there was a big bit of being clever after the event on tonight, and that was this business of shadows. But in fact, those shadow drawings were prepared with extraordinary honesty and accuracy, which seldom go together, and to really show them that it wasn't too bad, you know, that the place wasn't too overcast, and it was really, in retrospect, going back to the exhibition, it was really a sort of A, B, C, D type drawing, where one started not making the best of a dog's dinner, but reminding oneself that there are assets in deprivation, because the terms of deprivation are invariably one side of the coin. So I think that is something. I mean, you're right, there's nothing left to chance. Those 3 apparently jokey, inconsequential slides at the start are very key to the situation. Only so much as I find lectures, I mean, I find listening to yourself and others very valuable in sharpening up one's own, you can't say sharpening up your own tool, can you? And this comes back to the first point, collapse of Stout Party. Comes back to the first point in the discussion, that I am constantly interested in what the value is of such lectures. So I actually give them in a certain level of puzzlement. I mean, I sit and listen to the the 5 from New York, and I know exactly why they're giving their lectures. And I don't think it's worth the thought. Not those particularly, but I mean, I don't think. No, I don't. You know, I mean, I think there are some lectures aren't worth giving. It would be better to have them well printed or tapes and get them under plain cover at breakfast time. And therefore, there is that part, Peter, which I can't answer to your question, as to what the game is. I only know that the particular game is that I have a very sort of rapidly reached saturation point as far as how many lectures I can give in 1 year, and it's running at something like 10 at the moment, and that's probably too many. But they are very critical design tools for me. However, I hope that, that they've got some use to others. But only is that clown who is a fellow from Canterbury? Yeah. Ah, I was down in Canterbury this morning, and he'd been to the other two, you see, and he sort of said, well, I went out feeling cheated, and then I thought, my God, you put your finger on this and made it clear. And the two things he thought I put my finger on had not occurred to me. So it was very valuable that he'd been to those lectures, and to him as well. I mean, I didn't tell him. That's why I checked whether he was here. I'm not going to tell him I hadn't thought of that. But I certainly think there is a skill and a skill and a design method. I mean, all right, perhaps I overemphasize it, but I certainly think there is a large field of skill and design method in aiming to miss which isn't touched at the moment and should be. That's why I did the sort of horror comic Walt Disney suggestion for a new course for the RCA, just as a result of that one ruling from the minister. So I think that there, you know, at various times, things occur to me which I think are worth passing over. I think it's very nice the way you passed around complimentary wine. That was that's good timing. A nice touch. Nice meaning accurate. I mean, I didn't taste it myself. Hint. Is that answer anywhere near answer your thing? I mean, some things you can't answer, really. I mean, some of your questions you can't answer. You don't need an answer. Everyone's entitled to ask a question, but people aren't automatically required to answer them. Do you think it's a valuable use of your space? How about that for a question?
What I like about the use of the space is that the lectern is a loudspeaker, and the drawings behind your head, which have been here for the same 3 weeks, probably couldn't be more alien to what you're about. And it's nice that neither point is mentioned. You know, the nasty stain on the side of the loudspeaker is covered up by reproductions of your head, which one can see. And you don't mention the drawings that are seen probably when the odd person's sort of got used to what you look
and
like.
Cannot see the slides anyhow.
I like that. That's the only comment about the use of space.
Yeah, I think that's good. But that you see, now that is back to our 600 million who are hungry. That is very valuable smearing of the image. You know, that really is peanut butter, jam, and bottle, which you know, and with bread underneath, which is valuable to make because it would be of no advantage to anyone else if we excluded the peanut butter and only kept the other three. But we must take it's not really a sort of Talleyrand thing of taking advantage of decadence, but you know that we must really capitalize on our riches. And one of our riches at the moment is that we still have time to make mistakes. And that ain't going to last all that long. And if we make mistakes privately, we're being selfish, mean, and in fact are you know, burning coal in the room next to the one we're sitting in.
The reason I came to the lecture, Cedric, was that they're the most amusing lectures that I've ever been to. I've gone through W.C. Fields to Robert Benchley, and it's been fascinating.
Well, that's lovely.
I see a very precise objective in all that you've done. I think you've been aiming at a very precise philosophy. And when you showed the joint analysis that you put up on the screen, and then listed the advantages of all this thing, as though they were coincidental. But obviously, those advantages were the objective, the target. They weren't something that just happened because you were aiming to miss. You were aiming at those objectives and you arrived at this loose assemblage of eminence. So I'm suspicious of your diagram. And it presumes,
yes, fine.
you know what you want to miss to begin with.
It does presume that I can recognize other people's targets. Yes. Yeah.
I think you enjoy that reputation, actually, refuting other people's targets. And I think that's one of the reasons why food is something that upsets you. Because food's one of the few things about which everybody's an expert. And so it's one of the few commodities which has become considered within the terms of a sort of general conceptual framework that informs society at large. So people are interested in what food does to you. And the food industry has been very quick to jump on that and inform people further about what food does to them and exploit that. You have a sort of nostalgia for, it seemed to me, for the way in which food feeding is treated in less developed societies, if you like, societies which don't yet have the luxury of a functionalist view of the various commodities, but are doomed still to a sort of ontological view of it, where they're still obsessed with what food is rather than what it does to them. And I sense a sort of resentment on your part that we don't have that view here, which would allow you to mock our attitudes to food, its waste, its consumption, the talent with which you managed to castigate architecture.
I think there's a bit of that. I don't think I'm quite as contemptuous of our attitude to food as I am jealous of the sort of almost subliminal methodology whereby we're fed it. You know what I mean? That I think that it is an extraordinary cool operation. That the little pimples are at both ends of the scale. One is the absurdity of actually having to go to hospital through swallowing a plastic spacecraft in your cornflakes. And the other is the recent outrage from these chicken farmers who've now been told that when we collectively are not going to buy their blasted eggs and powder them down, in saying that if we'd known that, we would have got hens which taste better when slaughtered and lay less eggs. You know, we'd have covered ourselves both ways. Now, those are only the humps in a system that operates both publicly and privately, both central government and capitalism.
Where's all that veal from those calves which were sold at 20p a head?
Yeah, yes. You see, and therefore I'm in admiration of that particular system and feel, which I may be wrong on this, because I wasn't nostalgic about the third world and they're realizing that food is, you know, to be eaten rather than what it's about. It was that I felt that architects either, as you said earlier, either make quite clear that they are no longer in a particular game, that they've let it run too long, and it requires rather more rigorous and more sub-level systeming for provision in relation to shelter, or they actually improve their skills in aiming to miss and do the thing. So I think that the long grain thing, I don't know if you can spend 30 minutes on the Ford Foundation long grain experiment, which was very interesting, because having introduced it, you know, it wasn't only 3 crops a year, it was also each crop was rather better, so that your same tractor, the same cutting capacity, or whatever they cut things off with. You're good at words, you remembered orchard. What do they cut the growth. And that actually the same thing and the same load was that much more valuable. And this is why it may be best to not worry about actually flying Concords, and in fact save a certain amount of money on the engines and allow people to live in them, but go on building them so people can afford to live in them. I think that
actually for the shelter thing, because I think it's a nice sort of cyclical development. And I particularly wanted to pick up the question of the proportion of work that architects account for in the state, because we did have a look at this recently, trying to do cobwebs off. The most interesting thing that we found was when you look at new industrial building, in the UK, architects are associated with roughly 38% of new industrial buildings, according to British Steel Corporation. Whereas in the States, new industrial building involves over 95% of it involves architects. Whereas when you look at figures for housing, they're almost the converse. Which implies a different relationship between the architect and his client, as opposed to some sort of end user for whom he slavishly tailors his social objectives. In a rather intriguing way.
It's kind of, I can think of two large firms, triple-barrel names of partners in the States who remain nameless, who in fact are automatically brought into industrial work almost at the stage when a company is thinking of expanding, i.e. even before it's thought of building a building, which doesn't happen here.
That's right, yes. I'm sure that's right, because also there's, you've got your art offices and your production offices.
Yeah.
Here we've got offices which do neither very well, it seems to me. I'm only sort of going on about this architecture business because the one flaw for me in your otherwise charming talk was this constant allusion to architects and architecture and the RIBA and all these things.
Well, I brought a bit of parish pump in on purpose because I left it out of the first two.
I'm sorry.
No, I know. That's why I gave you that answer. But it's true nevertheless. It's true nevertheless. And I found, you must have noticed, I faltered a bit. I find it a bit difficult to talk about architects and planners and the RIBA in quite the same frame. But on the other hand, there are a number here. And so it was, and that's another. You see, that's another business of blurring the image in order for people to like sort of, what's that stuff when they did it with eggs and poster paint? Chiaroscuro or something. Yeah. Tempera. He's given up feeling midnight. But you know what I mean, that there was parish pump brought in, you're quite right. And I think it's a bit cheap, a bit cheap trick, but because it isn't cheap, actually. If you don't bring it in, then they say, oh, I don't mean, then one says to oneself, well, that's all very well, but he doesn't realize what we're up against tomorrow. You see, and what you're up against tomorrow is too late anyhow. If you've got